Okay.
How would you describe the sort of Marianne Williamson foreign policy agenda or theory or vision to the
Right out the gate, we're getting a foreign policy question.
extent that there is a sort of cohesive principle that would bind it together?
Well, John F. Kennedy said we must end war or war will end us. I look at war and peace much the same way I look at sickness and health. Sickness is the absence of health. Health isn't the absence of sickness. And war is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. So
What the fuck does that mean? What the
That
fuck did you just
that was
say?
nonsense. That was gibberish.
So I think we need to wage peace as seriously as we wage war.
Okay, that's good. Just stick that. Cut the rest. Just say that. AMLO in Mexico, his platform was hugs, not bullets, right?
Yeah.
That's just keep that as your line. Do that. Wage peace. That's a great slogan.
Mentioning before, there are specific factors involved in waging peace. There are specific things that you can do to increase the incidence of peace. Right now, we have an 850.
I'm not positive, but this looks like a Zoroastrian medallion. It's hard to tell, though. It might be just like a generic bird, but it looks like there's enough detail that it's like that type of Zoroastrian talisman, but I'm not sure.
$58 billion military budget. We have a $60 billion State Department budget, and we have something like $1.9 billion that we give to the USAID. Now, of those three, the USAID arguably does more to create peace in the world because it actually addresses the needs of people.
She got a
So
huge chin.
I would want a foreign policy, first of all, where diplomacy, State Department,
Always we have to criticize women whenever they're trying to get into politics, don't we?
efforts of diplomacy take far more primacy. They have been sort of cast to the side of the room. It's the opposite of what used to be true. It used to be true that the State Department was at the table and the military guys were sitting in the back of the room. Today, the military people are at the table and the State Department. It used to be that if you were having a foreign policy discussion and somebody said, "Oh, we can't do that, that we couldn't get that past state," that would be taken very seriously. Today, it's like a joke. People would roll their eyes. Ooh, state's not going to like it. So we have to go in and clean all that up. Now, having said that, I look at the U.S. military like I look at a surgeon. If you have to have surgery, you better believe you want to have the best surgeon. But you're also, any reasonable person would seek to avoid surgery if at all possible. So we have a history of imperialistic misadventures in this country. We know the criminality of the Iraq War, the thousands of people, possibly millions of people, if you count people elsewhere, who have died from Vietnam to Iraq, and certainly the last 20 years or so in Afghanistan.
Adding in Vietnam there, talking about just you can go to millions as long as you include like everything. Like Vietnam was
100%.
such a black ops war. Like the bombing of Laos, like it was something like every 6 seconds a fully loaded plane was bombing Laos for 9 years or something like that, maybe 6 minutes. They bombed basically every square inch of Laos except like near the top.
For what reason?
The same reason why we were bombing into Waziristan.
Oh, was that a part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, was it?
Yeah.
Through Laos?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think America has a lot to atone for. Our imperialism, quite
atone is such a scary word. That word carries religious connotations with it, though, and it becomes culty.
America needs to rectify its actions.
Better word. Yes, I agree.
You're just looking at like slavery. There was like 6 million there, and then 7 million. Like the population of Africa is still destabilized, and they have the youngest population. So it's like now is the perfect time for the U.S. to actually start rectifying the things that it did.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But
and
you've also
Joe Biden is doing that. Joe Biden is invested heavily in Africa.
Yeah. But you've also got all these other countries, these other players who are there to destabilize again, They want to keep it destabilized so they can
Mhm.
profit from the riches of Africa.
Well, I was just thinking about this today with South Sudan. South Sudan is, it's a fucked country because it's like just how it came to be. But if America's infrastructure funding gets behind the project that's going on, the oil project to redirect through these African states, if America gets on board and helps out with that, maybe something like that would be really nice to see. Helping fund oil pipelines. Green infrastructure projects are cool and all, but South Sudan has oil and nothing else. And it's the only way that South Sudan is going to recover through those oil projects.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Are needing to turn a corner. And I think there are some people within the defense establishment, or at least the foreign policy establishment, who are trying to do that. Undeniably, however, there is in this town what's called the blob, the defense establishment, which exerts tremendous, tremendous power. Even though the neoconservative views, the Iraq War, et cetera, had been proven to have been utter failures and utter wrongs, that power is still exerted, and they'd have a problem when it comes to me.
So Bernie made some news recently when in an interview he said we should condition aid to Israel now contingent upon some sort of a peace deal and Palestinians getting human rights. Do you agree with that position that we should condition our
Is
aid
that
to
Kyle
Israel?
Kulinski?
In other words, if they start bombing.
Yes.
What the fuck happened to his head?
I was thinking that too, but I just
wanted to check if that's who we're listening to.
Yeah, I don't know how old this is either.
In Gaza or something like that, you have civilian casualties. We go, you know what? Sorry, but those billions we give you, you're not getting them now.
Absolutely. No money should go to Israel that's not specifically for defensive purposes. Absolutely.
Based on defensive what?
She shouldn't have finished that sentence.
Yeah,
all right?
she should have stopped at no money
Everything
to
Israel says it does is defensive. Israel does not do offensive things. Israel does only defensive things. So if you're classifying that as the only aid that goes to them is defensive, no, we shouldn't. We should drop defense from that statement and just not give anything to military spending with Israel. And if we do, it needs to be cross-established stuff, like cross-established research. We can control the production of.
Yeah, and also track their use of them as well. Like if they use ammunition to kill Palestinians, it should be rescinded immediately.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that you look at the bomb Trump dropped on those 40 children in Yemen. A lot of people were pissed about that. It had major consequences on the relationship with Saudi Arabia. That needs to happen when children die in Palestine. And it doesn't happen because Arafat used human shield tactics. And so now everything can be just excused with they were human shields.
What is your view of what's going on in Israel right now? There was just recent news that even Trump's ambassador to Israel, who is famously sort of very pro-Israel and very hawkish, was condemning Netanyahu's attacks on the independent judiciary there. Go ahead.
It's terrible what's happening in Israel. This is the most far-right government that the country has ever seen. The attacks, as you mentioned, on the judiciary there were 100,000 people in the streets in Tel Aviv protesting this. I'm very concerned. When you have someone like Anthony Blinken going over there, and even him saying in public, watch it, baby. I think that means something, and I think that is the appropriate. I'd love to hear President Biden say, "Watch it, Bibi," and you would certainly hear that from me.
So, when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, this has been a very heated topic for understandable reasons. People point out you have an illegal and offensive invasion against a country that didn't attack Russia. Russia was the aggressor. But then you also have people pointing out, hey, there was NATO sort of built up to Russia's border, and that.
Shut up, dickhead.
No, first of all, this is a leading question. Don't lead your questions, bro.
I had a feeling he was going to go this way.
Don't lead the question. Just ask, how do you feel about the situation in Ukraine? You're going to take it whatever way they want.
As some semblance of a provocation because they viewed it as aggressive from the West. But putting all that aside.
Bro, if she just goes, Russia invaded 9 years ago or something like that.
Yeah.
That that would be a cool thing for her to do.
It would. Whether she does or not,
the more important question here, and the more important point is, as president, would you actually try to get to the negotiation table and try to work diplomacy, because that's actually a
No peace with
controversial
fascists.
position here in this city where we're sitting in DC. Nobody's allowed to say the word negotiation or diplomacy, because then they say, oh, you're appeasing.
It's not our country.
And no peace with fascists.
It's up to Ukraine.
Yeah.
You're Neville Chamberlain, you know, you can't make a deal with the madman or whatever.
We don't run the fucking world,
that's
dude.
the way to go, negotiation and diplomacy, or should we continue
not what he thinks.
effectively funding the proxy war?
Funding the proxy war. Go fuck yourself.
Fuck this guy.
It's a complicated situation, but of course the goal should be negotiation. Of course, the goal should always be negotiation and diplomacy. And General Milley and the Rand Corporation have said that that is the only possibility here. So I think the question is, when can that happen? I think that those are, you know, I've heard so many people on both sides.
When Russia leaves.
I'm liking what she's saying so far, though, how she's leading this
topic, come to the conclusion that, of course, you want a negotiated settlement. The only issue is, when is that possible?
This is the same thing we said about like backing the Syrians and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, of course, negotiations. You know, we looked at the one guy who was, I think he was talking to Jen Psaki, and we were looking at it from back when the Syrian civil war was going on with Obama, and he was asking questions like, how come Obama isn't supporting negotiations and stuff like that. The same type of situation. So this stance of like, when is negotiation appropriate? That's the stance you want to take to get out of the question.
Yes.
Some say the United States could come in there right now and say, I want a negotiated settlement. And of course we want a negotiated settlement. The United States should do anything possible to make that happen. I have my questions about whether or not Vladimir.
The United States doing that would be a major acceleration of the war as well.
Yeah, it really would. Russia would take it as a propaganda.
And like, so like, people need to, if you're saying that guns are accelerating the war, you should also be looking at, if you think America going in there and forcing Russia to stop isn't accelerating the war, you're crazy.
Putin would be as open as we might like to such conversation if we were to say it today and couple that with complete withdrawal of our military support. But that absolutely should be the goal, and the analysis should always be, at what point and how can we best exercise our power to influence this situation in such a way that negotiation and diplomacy, in order to save lives, in order to decrease the risk of nuclear encounter, might occur.
It's never going to happen.
What do you make of the reports that early on in the war there was publicly reported?
She sidelined that whole question. That was great. I would have liked it a lot better if she said they invaded 9 years ago.
Yeah.
Take a hard and non-imperialist stance there too, and then just be like, if you are hard on Russia invading, like, we wouldn't have the arms race if Russia wasn't there. Russia leaving ends the arms race as well.
Well, yeah, Russia leaving solves everything. That's the point.
Yeah.
There were peace negotiations going on. No one can know exactly whether they would have come to any sort of a deal ultimately. But recently, the former Israeli prime minister talked about his involvement in those talks, that there seemed to be concessions being made on both sides. And effectively, the West, led by the U.S., said, we don't want this deal right now. You know, and the underlying implication was, Russia's not doing well. We think we can strike a blow against Russia. We actually want this war to continue. What do you make of those reports?
I think those reports are true. They're indisputably true. And we know that Boris Johnson went over and talked to Zelensky. I believe those things. And I also heard that interview with the former Israeli prime minister. It's indisputably true. So the voice of those who would say, let's perpetrate this war, let's keep it going in order to weaken Russia, they would not be in the room with me. They would have no influence on my thinking whatsoever. Those who are concerned about the imperial.
I don't think those type of people have influence on Biden's thinking.
No.
Either.
I also want to just point out that if we really, really, really think about what's happening, and like the only solution that's even viable is Russia leaving.
Well, I was just saying, the neocon attitude of bleeding. So that was one of the things that you'll hear a lot of people, Soviet Afghan apologists, saying that the United States, they didn't give the stingers at first. They escalated the aid because they wanted Russia to bleed and to collapse. They prolonged the war. But like, then you talk to somebody like Brzezinski, and he said that the stingers were essential to bringing about an end to the war. So Brzezinski was always pushing for more weapons, and he was the most anti-Soviet there. So the idea that the neocon thing of bleeding Russia and bleeding the Soviets, Biden isn't going to tolerate that shit. Biden isn't going to have those people around him. So she's ultimately having the same stance as Biden here, because
that's funny.
Biden, he even did it with Afghanistan. We could have done a lot more there, but he says Afghanistan wants freedom, they have to fight for it. That's always been his stance.
Yeah.
It's like you have to fight for it yourself. Ukraine, as long as they continue fighting for shit themselves, they're going to get weapons.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Imperialistic invasion on the part of Putin, despite the imperialism in our own past.
Well done.
Yeah, but they all say that. They'll always condemn Russia's invasion. All the Russian shills will do that up front on American access stuff. They'll say they will say that.
Concerned about the invasion of a sovereign nation and wanting to analyze what this would mean for that entire area, they would have a voice with me. But those who just want to use this as a proxy war to weaken Russia, to me, those are the voices of horror. They have had far too much influence in this. They're no different than those who said, let's invade Iraq, in my mind.
Hold on, pause it.
They would have no voice
So
with me.
my issue with this whole thing is the question was preceded by Russian propaganda.
Yeah, and she's not taking the bait. She's just saying she's anti-neocon here. That's all she's saying.
Yeah.
That's all she said.
It's still phrased and poised in the aspect of Russian propaganda. That's my issue here. Is that
she's not dispelling it.
No,
actively.
and that's my issue.
But that's the thing is that if she actually wants popularity behind her, she should be very hesitant. We should be more criticizing the person who's asking a leading question than her.
They probably have their opinions about China, and that have no voice with me on their opinions there either.
So the last time you ran for office, there was a period where you weren't in favor of Medicare for all, and then when you dropped out, you endorsed Bernie, and you have pretty clearly had a change of heart, where now you wholeheartedly support the idea of Medicare for all. What was it specifically that made you change your mind and realize that this is the way to go?
That I saw that it wasn't as easy as I had thought it was. I thought with Medicare, with Medicaid, I underestimated the administrative difficulties that people go through. I underestimated how much of the insurance people could get was still underinsured. I underestimated how much the system wears people down and leaves people out. I got that wrong. I had it wrong. I mean, it wasn't like I didn't listen to people. I remember speaking to a Medicare for All expert, but I simply had it wrong until I didn't. It was a little bit of one of those amazing grace moments. I was blind, and then I saw, and I went, "Whoa."
So this is probably the most important question to me, because as much as I, love Bernie Sanders with his 2 runs, towards the end of his campaign, I had some very, very strong disagreements with how he was approaching the situation. He dropped out, endorsed Joe Biden. They did this very sad looking hostage-like phone call where, do you support a $15 minimum wage, Joe? Yeah, Bernie, I support. It was I was watching it. I was like, oh, okay. It felt gross.
Oh, it was painful.
So here's, let me set up a hypothetical for you, and I'm very curious what your answer is to this. Let's say we're at the end of the summer. The race is over. You made a phenomenal run at it, but you got 42% of the vote and came up just short. Joe Biden calls you, and Joe Biden says, hey, Marianne, look, we've said things about each other over this past however long, but, I'm an old school politician, and I want to talk to you. I want to have a meeting. Let's talk. Let's make a deal.
Joe was on his good meds that day.
Yes, he was. And, so you get into the talk with him, and he very clearly is looking for your endorsement, for you to drop out and to endorse him. Could the American people have your word that in a meeting like that, you will have a list? Here are 5 things, 10 things, all things that you have the authority to do as president of the United States. You don't need Congress. This is all things you could theoretically do through executive order, just like the lowering the prescription drugs like we talked about before. Will you give people your word that you won't just roll over and say, "Yeah, yes, I'll endorse you, and I'm not going to ask anything in return"?
Such
Will it be
stupid fucking.
contingent
This is
upon,
not a
yeah,
question.
I'll endorse you, but here's what I'm getting in
Shut
return for
up!
it. And
Stop
by the way, if you
talking.
don't
She
deliver on
knows what
that,
you're
this is not
saying.
over. Then I'm gonna, publicly crusade against
Just
you and
let her
remind everybody
talk.
that you vote
Answer.
for
Let
it.
her answer
You
your
know, I remind you
question.
that I'm not a legislator. I don't have a political career there that I have to worry about going back to. If I got 42% of the vote, you think then I just like fold and walk away and not take anything with me after all that I and so many other people would have had to go through to get to 42%? No, no, I would not walk away
That's a
easy.
good
And
answer.
no,
So
absolutely.
you'd have a list of demands
I would have a list of demands and I
and you
would
negotiate it.
well, absolutely, and I would consider all options actually,
Mm,
and how I thought that I could, with that 42%, make a difference in this country. You better
mm,
believe it.
mm. Um, what did you learn last time around?
I don't know if it's so much well, certainly I learned a lot about just how what it means to run for president. There's no doubt about that. But I think the changes in myself more than anything. Talked to Nina Turner about this. When you go through a certain kind of acid bath of the hate that people throw at you, the smears, the mischaracterizations, the lies, it gives you some emotional antibodies. There are things that I can ignore now that you say like, "How could they say that about me?" I'm just like, "Whatever, that's what they do." And I think learning that's an emotional lesson and psychological lesson in just flying above some of that. I have some things that I believe need to be said. As a writer, I was from the earliest days of my career, I had read a line by a man named Arnold Patton. He said, "If you genuinely have something to say, there is someone out there who genuinely needs to hear it." I'm having a conversation. I'm having a conversation with people who I know agree with me. And I know that there's an ameliorative effect in having this conversation and
So
harnessing
echo chamber.
political purposes. I'm doing this. For the people who don't like it, there's a term contempt prior to investigation. I know how many people are criticizing my books who never read them, or
Mhm.
criticizing my career who know nothing about it, or criticizing me who don't know me. It's one thing to criticize me for things that I might deserve criticism for, but things that I just, what I've learned is ignore. Ignore. I've always thought if somebody criticizes you, the first thing you need to do is ask, is there any truth to it? Even if there's 10%, is there anything to learn from that? But beyond that, in the field of politics, what I've learned is a friend of mine wrote me, she wrote this to me in a text the other day. Keep your eyes on the light of the fire. I want to keep my eyes on what's important. What are the issues we're talking about? What would we do with the presidency? What is the agenda we can offer to the American people? What do people need? What can we discern? How could we provide the help? How could we help transform this government back into the government of the people, by the people, and for the people? What I've learned is to make those issues and those questions, give them the entire.
You're actually saying back to the government by the people for the people.
Back
This is what
to.
I'm talking about. How the left is going to go actually into the New Deal. Like it's going to revert back to that New Deal type thing.
Okay.
So, like, obviously she's not going to win. This is the idea that's coming up. Is this new left idea is definitely going to be something that's mainstream very, very soon.
Yeah.
Maybe when they talk about people who influenced it, they'll talk about writers and authors who are influential, and she'll be like in there,
Maybe.
And lastly, for me, why will this time be different than last time?
Well, first of all, Bernie was running, and I think that a lot of people who do agree with me were not seeing me, understandably, uh, in the sense that they were so supportive of Bernie, but also for reasons that I think many of them now realize was a lot of fairy dust thrown in their eyes about me, who I am, and what I stand for. But also, Krystal, I think the country is different. I think many of the things that I talk about aren't so easily mocked. How are you going to say to people who themselves are dealing with depression, are dealing with anxiety, are dealing with so many internal problems? Let's mock the woman who speaks about those things.
Mm.
I think people have kind of woken up to the idea
Woke?
that it is not woo woo kooky crazy to recognize that the problems of our time will not be solved with thinking that is based on bad ideas left over from the end of the 20th century. Einstein said the problems of the world will not be solved on the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. This is a new century. I see it. Young people get it. It's like it's a whole systems breakdown. We need a whole person response. We have to realize if you don't take care of a child today, you will need more prisons later. If you don't take care of people's needs today, you will have a mental health crisis later. If you don't, as FDR said, provide the blessings of democracy.
Quoting FDR now. I told you, man.
You do.
I know my vibes.
You will have the threat of authoritarianism later. I think a lot of people are ready to say, she's right. It's not just symptoms. We have to talk about cause. And the people who only want to talk about symptoms want to talk about it because it's a transactional, above the neck politics that has no care or concern about human suffering.
This is what I say. It's easy.
It's what got us into this mess.
It's easy to make policies like this.
I would then loop this into the only time they want to talk about mental health is when there's a mass shooting.
Mass shootings, yeah. And then they do nothing.
That would be very emphasizing on your point. Of
it really would be.
If that's your platform.
Mess. It's not what's going to get us out of this mess. And my hope is that they'll give me a listen. And I believe that if they do, and if I do my work well, then we could help change. We could change this country.
You got to be an asshole.
I saw in a previous interview you did, there was like a little bit of like a lightning round
It's
portion.
the time of asshole politics.
Hey, if you could only do one policy, you have to pick just one, what would you pick? And you gave a good answer. You said universal healthcare, Medicare for all. I thought that was a very good answer.
I didn't. It's funny that you say that because I thought about it later and I thought, nope, I would have said something else, but go on.
Okay.
Well, what would you have said?
Well, the undue influence of money, particularly corporate money on our political system, is the cancer underlying all the other cancers.
Yes.
So if I had that magic wand that I was asked, I would overturn Citizens United.
Yeah. Well, that's an even better answer. And we can talk off air. We could talk about this, but I can explain to you how it's not just Citizens United. It's McCutcheon.
Of course.
It's Buckley versus Leo. There's
just money out of politics.
Anyway,
just say money out of politics.
That's a very good answer as well.
That's all you need to say.
A lightning round for
okay.
You. Give me an answer, one word. Got 3 quick questions. Number 1, can you beat Joe Biden?
Yes.
Number 2,
she could beat him if it was just him and her, and they had to actually debate and talk about things. She could beat him there, but it's just not realistic with how fascist the Republicans are right now. I would be more focused on influencing Joe Biden. Having push these ideas forward.
An interesting concept. I don't disagree.
Can Joe Biden beat Donald Trump again or Ron DeSantis?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Number 3, can you beat Trump or DeSantis?
Absolutely. Let me in there.
DeSantis, yes. I don't know about
that's
Trump.
A good note to end on.
I don't know if Trump is even going to
Marianne
make
Williamson
it there.
For president. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Thank you.
Tell everybody your Twitter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. You can find me at Marianne Marianne. I don't know if it's Marianne for President 2024 or I'm sure that we've got all the URLs. Try Marianne2024.com.
And what's your Twitter?
Come on, dude.
Find you there.
Fucking hell.
Well, honestly, it's better than Ron DeSantis's campaign website.
This is true. Nothing could be worse than that.
Did you see his website? It was.
Yeah, you showed me the website. It's appalling. It's just give me money.
Williamson.
I think there was like no clickable thing.
There you go.
Marianne2024.com. Let me check.
Well,
that's not it.
Well, it's not.
Oh,
yet.
you didn't type it in yet. You didn't type it in right.
Well, it's not live yet.
Yes, that's true too.
Oh, it's not out yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why.
Marianne
yeah.
2024.
Okay. It looks like it's
Jesus
Marianne
Christ.
2024. All right. On that note, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That's not a good end.
Bro, just throw your Twitter handle out there.
Yeah.
I guess. My website. I don't know. What's a website?